welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm sexy saxophone player Patrick.
I just realized we should have started the podcast with me saying I'm you and you're me. That would have worked out better.
Oh yeah, that's actually that would have been a good idea. No, how sexy was that trailer, Damon?
So I don't always play trailers, and I typically try not to play trailers unless they are like 30 seconds or 45 seconds, because some of these trailers get really long. There was only one trailer available for this. When I heard that music, it was a 2 minute and 20-minute trailer, but I like cut it down to make it like 45 seconds. Because I was like, how can we miss out on that sexy saxophone?
Oh my God, it really brings me back. And yeah, Damon, today we're obviously talking about Suitable Flesh, starring Heather Graham as Dr. Liz Derby, Judah Lewis as Asa White, Bruce Davison as Ephraim White, and the great Barbara Crampton, of course, as Dr. Daniela Upton, directed by Joe Lynch and written by Dennis Paoli, based off the story The Thing at the Doorstep by H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, Damon, the trailer, the movie, I'm getting big like early 90s vibes. You and I, we grew up in the day of cable boxes, right? They were these like aluminum or tin boxes or whatever that sat on the top of your TV, and you had to physically turn the button and click them. I'm aging us terribly. But you'd click over to like around channel 21 or 22 on that dial. You go and you'd get to something called Cinemax, Damon. And you and I both know Cinemax still exists. For those out there that do have cable, that you'll know, but those who don't, Cinemax is still out there. I don't know if they're still playing like movies like this on Cinemax. I don't watch a lot of Cinemax these days. But Damon, Suitable Flesh is like through and through a proper early 90s erotic horror thriller.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Cinemax used to have another nickname when we were growing up. It was called Skinemax. Because around midnight, the programming took a change. That's when you would get basically like adult films without the full-on adult experience, if that makes sense, without getting too graphic. And a lot of nudity, a lot of adult stars you'd probably recognize, but they were in, simulated sexual situations versus what you'd actually see in an adult movie. It was a calling card of Cinemax. And this film, Suitable Flesh. So to give a little background, like I didn't know much about this film originally. I just knew Barbara Crampton was promoting it when they were doing filming and everything, and I saw it was Heather Graham, so on and so forth. And I think it's been made clear numerous times on this podcast. I always call her the queen. I love Barbara Crampton, one of my favorite horror actresses of all time. Amazing champion of horror. And so I was intrigued just based upon that, based upon Barbara Crampton's involvement. It wasn't until later that I realized that Dennis Paoli had been a lifelong contributor to Stuart Gordon, and this was actually a film being set up for Stuart Gordon to direct. Sadly, he passed away in 2020, so he never got a chance to do it, and that's where it got passed on to Joe Lynch. So to be fair, when I saw this in December when it first came out, I watched it on demand. Then I rewatched it. It's now on Shudder. Hey, Shudder.
Hi, Shudder.
So it's out there now, but I watched it back in December. Again, not knowing any of this. I didn't know any of the background of the writing, director. I just wanted to see the movie. And I think I texted you right after I saw it, and I was like, Suitable Flesh, like it's pretty good. And I was like, it just reminds me of a Stuart Gordon meets Brian De Palma 80s erotic horror film. Like that's exactly what it reminded me of. I think that's a pretty apt description. I had no idea that Stuart Gordon's lifelong screenwriter was actually the one who wrote the script at the time. And I said, this really feels like that. And also feels like Brian De Palma, like straight up body double, dressed to kill, like really weird sexual situations and, random nudity and things like that. And I was like, that's kind of what this film feels like. Sure enough, I was pretty much right on the money.
The Stuart Gordon part, definitely, it gives heavy vibes of the Stuart Gordon movies, which we can appreciate on this podcast. There was just, the 90s, the 80s, but I think especially the 90s were like a really horny era. Like it was just like, if there was just sex in movies, and it was like just a break in the movie. It literally was just like, let's take a break and watch these two actors fuck. Which is kind of what it was. And we've gone away from that, and I think partly for like kind of a good reason. Like, you don't just need like sex in a movie just to have it. Like, make sure it's part of the story, because I think the more you and I watch movies, the more we're like, hey, don't waste our time. If I can be upset that like a movie stops to like do basically a music video inside of the movie, I think you know which movie I'm talking about. If there's a movie that like stops to just have a music video in the middle, I go, hey, you're kind of wasting our time. Like, I should feel the same way about sex scenes. Like, don't just waste our time with a sex scene. Yes, of course, we all like to be titillated. That's why we love horror. That's why we love thrillers. That's why we love action. It kind of heightens the senses. I get that. But I watch so many movies now that I do appreciate when the sex in those scenes actually has something to do with the movie. Suitable Flesh, very much in that vein. Sex is part of the thing. You might have to help me a little bit, Damon. I've only watched this movie once. You've gotten to see it twice. But like, I assume that this being, without getting too much into the spoilers, but this being that is inhabiting this horror situation, sex is kind of part of that game, right?
Well, so from my understanding, and again, I'm not the expert on Suitable Flesh. I'm just reading, and I've never read the Lovecraft story it's based upon, so I don't know how accurate this is based upon the original work. But from my understanding, what I gather is that Ephraim Waite, is that the guy's name? The guy.
Yes. Yeah, I was saying White in the thing, but yeah, it's Waite. Yeah.
Waite. Ephraim Waite is older. He's got a heart condition. He's basically 3 steps from death's door. And he's now found an incantation through this magical book that we don't ever hear explained, and that's fine, because again, I think you can go way too deep into mythology, and it just kind of like takes away from the actual movie. But it feels like he's just transferring his consciousness into new bodies because his is dying. And so because his is dying, you have to imagine in a world where a guy has a heart condition, a really bad heart condition, and he's older, he's probably not getting a whole lot of sex. So, I think that's the way I took it, was he was transferring into his younger son's body and then acting out his overall horniness on the world, and then he transfers that consciousness into Heather Graham's body, so on and so forth. And again, that's not spoilers. That's, you can see in the trailer that happens. Yeah, I think that, so I don't know necessarily that there's a quote unquote being as much as it's Ephraim Waite just like figured out a way to stay alive by putting his consciousness into more people's bodies, is the way I took it. Now, there might be a Lovecraft fanatic out there that's like, listen, dumbass, that's not true. But that's the way I took it.
Okay. I mean, I think that's one way to look at the whole thing. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we might need to get into spoilers earlier than later, but let's talk about the overall vibe of this movie first of all, Damon. When you're dealing with like a Stuart Gordon movie, I think step one is like, you need to have characters with very, I would say, left field ambition. In this case, Ephraim is our left field ambitionist, right? Like, he has this plan to leave this rotting husk that he has, this normal body that he has, and get into other bodies using dark magic, right? And that's another great element of Stuart Gordon movies, is the dark magic. How are you, Damon, with like magic movies? Because I know you're staunch, like, haunted house movies don't work for me because the easiest solution is get out of the house. What about dark magic movies?
So I tend to fall more on the side of, I'm not really a fan of the dark magic movies. They don't really do a whole lot for me. What I like about Stuart Gordon's earlier work, when you talk about Reanimator, that is technically science, bringing a dead life back,
right?
Bring a dead body back to life. From Beyond is almost like crossing boundaries between, universes.
Cosmic horror, yeah.
Yeah, cosmic horror. Castle Freak is, it's a story about a very disturbing creature, but again, not magic. So I don't really fall into the magic thing a whole lot. But again, I understand that's part of the whole Cthulhu horror, the Lovecraftian part of it, and I get it. Typically speaking, though, that's not really my jam. Now, I will say, I think part of the reason I liked Suitable Flesh better than I would a normal, let's cast a spell kind of movie is because what I mentioned earlier, they don't hammer you over the head with the magic. They don't hammer you over the head with the mythology. We learn there's a book and there's an incantation, and you can transfer your consciousness into another body. That's it. We don't really get into the where this book come from, who wrote it, all this, like, you could make a whole different movie just about that part of it. So in that regard, I would say this one's a little different, but I agree. By typical standards, I'm not like a let's cast a spell magic horror fan.
Yeah, there was some confusing magic in this movie for me. I mean, I think we'll have to wait for spoilers to really get into that stuff. But here's a couple of things that I definitely wanted to note. One is, like, I haven't seen Heather Graham in a movie in a while. That's not to say she's not working. I'm just saying I personally haven't seen her in a movie in a while, and it was like rad to see her back. When I was like at the, in my 20s at the peak of like watching films, she was in a lot of great stuff, and it was really cool to see her return. So that right then and there is like a big plus in my head. I'm just like, yeah, like here's Heather Graham's back in my field of vision. I know she's out there. I know she's working. I know she stays busy. But it was just cool to see her back. And Damon, I mean, we might as well just get out the gold leaf and all the and the sparklers and the poppers and everything. Barbara Crampton, who you worship, who I adore, the Queen, back in a movie. She has been promoting this movie like gangbusters all the way I feel like for quite a while now, over a year. She did take a pause during the SAG strike. She didn't promote the movie during the SAG strike, which I think kind of broke her heart, because she's a producer on this movie too. What people don't often know about Barbara Crampton is not only is she a great horror actor, she's a producer. She gets her hands dirty, and she actually works on these movies. She has a lot of say in how these movies go, and of course, working with the writer Dennis Powley. She's worked with Dennis Powley for quite a long time, so she's working on the script with him too. This is very much her baby, just as much as it is director Joe Lynch's baby. And so it's very cool to not just see her on screen, which we always love. We last talked about her in Jacob's Wife, which is a movie both you and I really loved. But now, you get to see her on screen, and you know that she's championing a movie. She's really gotten behind this movie, and it's great to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, Barbara Crampton is a huge credit to this industry, and as I said earlier, she's a champion of horror, a lifelong champion of horror, dedicated so much of her life to horror, and she was such a frequent collaborator with Stuart Gordon. I mean, that's how she got her start in Reanimator, From Beyond. I mentioned, of course, Castle Freak, and go on beyond that, and they stayed lifelong friends and continued to work together in some capacity. I know Barbara took several years off from acting. She was raising a family, and then she got back into acting largely through Adam Wingard's You're Next. That's kind of like her resurrection when she got back into acting again. And then since then, she's been incredibly busy, doing, supporting roles, starring roles like Jacob's Wife, producing, writing. I know she writes a monthly column for Fangoria magazine. So she is very, very active and busy in the horror community. And, that contribution can't be ignored, because some actors, and this, and I don't fault them, like some actors just never want to be pigeonholed as one kind of performer. I've heard interviews with actors. I was watching, do you remember an old show called Dinner for Five that Jon Favreau used to do?
Yeah, I love that show.
There was a show on there, and I want to say it was Jay Moore. Somebody else was talking about that, like why he never did television. And they're like, why don't you like doing television? He's like, I don't want to. He's like, I find it very formulaic, and 20 years from now, I don't want people walking down the street being like, oh, there's, Chandler from Friends. Sadly, of course, Matthew Perry passed away. But like, I don't want somebody being like, there's Ross from Friends. There's Joey from Friends. And when you do a TV role like that, that attaches to you forever. Like, you can't escape that, especially when you're on a hugely popular show. So I get it. Like, some actors who do horror kind of shy away from that years later, because they're like, I want to do drama, I want to do I want to do comedy, I want to do whatever. Barbara Crampton has done other things. She was a soap star. She's done other things beyond horror, but she always seems to fall back to horror, and it seems like she loves it. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate that she continues to champion the industry, champion other people's work. She's always promoting her friends, promoting other projects, promoting directors she's worked with in the past, all these kind of things. So I think it's so important that somebody like Barbara Crampton exists, that she not only exists in this space, but she loves it and she promotes it. And again, not everything she's a part of, not everything she produces, not everything that she advertises is going to be a smash hit. But the fact that, and you and I know this because we've talked about it, just like when we give a review to a movie that we don't particularly love, we always say, still, go see it for yourself, support it, see what you think, because what we think doesn't necessarily agree with what you might think. So the fact that Barbara Crampton, all these years later, coming from Reanimator, which I think was 1985, to now in 2024, that she is still a champion of horror is massive.
It's so huge. I was very fortunate enough to meet her at the premiere of Symphony, that the horror anthology. She was there. It was her. Get this, Damon. Her, Kelly Maroney, and Bonnie Aarons. Like, we're all hanging out, and I was just there to I was kind of like standing around, and I know some of the filmmakers from Symphony, so we're all hanging out, and I was just kind of skulking in the area because I did want to give my appreciation to these women and their amazing contributions to horror. I mean, you're talking about three of the giants of horror. And when I turn around, Jed Shepard introduces me to Barbara Crampton. She runs up and just hugs me like I'm like her son, and she hasn't seen me in 10 months. And she's like, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you." And I was like, what an amazing person this is. And then she introduces me to Kelly and Bonnie, who are both equally as lovely. You can't get more lucky to know people on that level and still see that they are that friendly and that welcoming and warm to people. That's what's so cool about the horror community. And I'll be honest, Damon, this really wasn't my kind of movie. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I don't love this movie. We got yelled at by one of our regular listeners for being a little overly negative recently. And I go, yeah, fair enough. Like, okay, you don't want to hear us say that we don't like a movie, but sometimes it's true. Sometimes we just don't like it, and we want to be honest with how we felt about it and not just glad hand, because that does happen. Other podcasts, I've talked to other podcasters who are sponsored by certain outlets, let's just say, that they actually, you know, they get money. We don't. We're independent. We do our own thing. They have to be nice about movies. They have to, and that's a really tough thing to do. We don't have to be nice, but I think even when we are critical of movies, we still love that they're being made. I still love Joe Lynch. Joe Lynch made Mayhem. Fantastic movie. If you haven't seen that, go see that. Here, listen to our review. We talked about it. Joe Lynch is a great filmmaker. Heather Graham is a great actor. Barbara Crampton's a great actor. All the people in this, all the people that are involved with this movie, I appreciate them, even if the movie didn't work for me. It's quite okay. It's quite okay that a movie doesn't work for you. I still want it out there. I still want our listeners to go and see it and let me know what they loved about it or what they didn't love about it. I like all the comments, even when people are like, that movie sucked. Okay, I like it. You didn't have to say that. Expand on that a little bit if you can for me. You know, don't just tell me it sucked, because I don't think even the worst movie, and you know which one I don't like the most. I wasn't like, this sucks. I was like, it didn't work for me for all these reasons, for all these many reasons. So I just wanted to get that out there that yes, Suitable Flesh wasn't my favorite movie. But did it make me happy to see Barbara Crampton on screen kicking ass alongside Heather Graham kicking ass? Yes, of course it does. That in and of itself is a great silver lining. So yeah, Damon, you know, I don't know. I'll let you guide us into spoilers, but you know, we'll talk about the things that didn't work for me in this movie. But still, go see this damn movie. I mean, if Barbara Crampton's proud of it and she's out there, you know, banging the drum for this thing, it's for a good reason. You know, she believes and she works hard in this stuff. So we appreciate that here at Rewind to the Living Dead. I appreciate someone like Barbara Crampton. Keep it coming, folks. Keep it coming, no matter what I say.
Yeah, one thing real quick before we get into spoilers, I'll say that we did an episode, I think it was December when we did, I want to say it was It's a Wonderful Knife, and we talked about kind of the raw nature of the horror community, that we do want to support creators, and especially independent creators, because those are the hardest movies to get made sometimes.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not that, I mean, well, judging by what's going on lately, it is actually pretty hard to get a Scream movie made. But if you got successful IP like the Conjuring universe, you don't have to sell anyone on making it. James Wan probably doesn't have to beg Warner Brothers to make another Conjuring movie or another Nun movie because they bring in hundreds of millions of dollars. Independent films like this one are what it takes a lot to get made. You don't have a budget. You're not, working with a massive cast. You're working on smaller sets. All this kind of stuff happens. So we are champions of that kind of horror. The reality, though, is sometimes those movies don't work, and I'm never going to lie to our audience. I'm never going to tell you I like a movie that I didn't like. So just to be clear, we're never trying to be negative. It's just if I don't like a movie, I'm not going to sit here and be like, man, that movie was amazing. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and it really enthralled me. The story was great. If I don't like it, I'm going to tell you. And I've had plenty of movies that we've liked, and people said, dude, that movie was terrible. And I'm like, well, we agree to disagree.
Yeah.
That being said, let's get into spoilers. And so for people that haven't seen it, of course, as I mentioned, Suitable Flesh, currently available on Shudder. Go watch it. Again, whether you love us or hate what our opinions are, go watch it and see for yourself. For me, getting into spoilers, Suitable Flesh worked fairly well for me on a couple of levels. Basically, the story goes like this. There's a doctor, Elizabeth Derby. Elizabeth Derby, played by Heather Graham. She's a psychologist, and she's conducting a session with a patient, and out of nowhere, this young man named Asa comes to visit her in her office after reading her book. And she did a book on, schizophrenic disorders of, basically identity disorder, almost like DID, dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personalities. And he's like, I read your book, and I think I need your help. I feel like my father is taking over my body. And that's really the premise. And she gets drawn to him both sexually and then kind of like drawn to him as a doctor because of his story. And so she ends up going to his house to see if he's okay after she doesn't see him again. She runs into his father, who is sickly and dying, has a heart condition, and Asa tries to warn her away because his father is the evil. His father is trying to take over his body and essentially rid himself of this cancerous, dead, dying husk of a body and put his consciousness into his son. And so through an incantation, if you read it 3 times, you are permanently there in their body. So you have to do it, transfer, wait, do it again. It's like that. The more you do it, the more you become this person. And so that's really the premise of the movie, because then once the transfer happens into Ace's body, then Asa transfers that consciousness into Heather Graham's body and then into another body and back, so he's basically bouncing body to body, whether it's choice, like he just wants to experience this, or through necessity when somebody gets arrested and he wants to bounce himself into another body. So that's really the premise of the story. And that not the most complicated story in the world. And again, the reason it worked for me, Patrick, really just boils down to those 2 key factors I mentioned at the beginning. The early Stuart Gordon work, like Reanimator, is good, funny, pretty solid story, and we can't deny there's some horny storytelling in there. Like there is. There's some sexual tension throughout that movie, from early in the movie to when the professor, you can tell he has something for Barbara Crampton's character in that movie, and he's kind of trying to hit on her, and like it's a little kind of like the creepy professor story going on. And then, we also know, things get, the very famous scene of the severed head. We all know, I don't need to go into detail about Reanimator all these years later. And From Beyond, very much the same kind of vibe. There's a moment where she comes out in the dominatrix outfit. Like, there's a real sexual tension in these kind of movies. So I appreciate that. And then early De Palma work, and I talk about Body Double, which funny enough, I saw Body Double as a late night Cinemax movie when I was a kid. Had no idea it was a Brian De Palma movie. What I knew is that the star of the movie was Craig Wasson. The star of the movie was the same guy who was in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. So when I saw the movie, I was like, hey, it's the guy from Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And so I watched the movie. There were some really incredibly cheesy parts. There's some full-on saxophone playing makeout scenes. Like, it is. So I'm not sitting here telling you that this is like Oscar-worthy work. I'm not.
Sure.
It's fun, cheesy, and the movie we reviewed before this, Founders Day, I said, would we be judging this movie slightly differently if it had come out in 1987? that film still felt more current, and so it kind of didn't work because you're like, you just didn't evolve with the species being slasher films. Suitable Flesh, what it does well is it knows what it is, it doesn't try to be more than what it is, and this really does feel like an late 80s, early 90s erotic horror thriller. And to me, they do it right. They don't overcomplicate the plot. You get some really great sexual tension in there. Again, because you're working with Heather Graham, who's a great actor, Jonathan Chase, who of course is the lead singer of the Wonders from That Thing You Do.
I totally went over my head.
Barbara Crampton. You get a cast like that, you kind of up the ante a little bit. So yeah, again, I'm not going to lie to you and say this is a 5-star movie and let's start nominating awards, but for what it's trying to be, if this came out in 1990, I would say, oh yeah, I just saw Reanimator, I saw From Beyond, I saw Castle Freak, and I saw Suitable Flesh. It would fit right in that little sweet spot.
Sure, yeah. I mean, listen, when the sax comes on, the clothes better come off. I mean, that's part of the rule of a great Skinamax thriller from the 90s. I think my only issue really with this movie, because we are contextual on this show, I think we gave Founders Day a glowing review, in my opinion. There's some things that are ridiculous about it. There are many ridiculous things about many of the movies we absolutely adore. That part's okay. So I do grade Suitable Flesh on a curve as well. I go, okay, this is a lower budget movie. Okay, they're working within certain limitations. I don't expect certain things to be great. Truth be told, I always say this, there's not really such a thing as bad performances for the most part. And the movies that we deal with, we're almost always dealing with great actors. So that's never an issue. It always comes down to the script. At the end of the day, if there is a grand issue that I have with a movie, it usually has to do with the script. Now, people will be like, whoa, you better tread lightly here. That's Dennis Powell you're talking about. Okay, that he's hallowed ground. Listen, Dennis doesn't need my approval at all. Like, trust me, he's fine. And he'll be okay if some independent podcast goes, hey, your script didn't work for me. That's where I think I bump up against this movie. There's general ideas in there that I can freak with. I get it. I just felt that the acceleration at which the movie moves leaves a lot out. I think it leaves a lot of like character work out in my opinion. For instance, when Dr. Derby is confronted by Asa, she like almost is immediately turned on by him. Now, in a 90s movie, in a context, that usually is the case. I get it, sure. But there was no like denial of him at first. It was like, I'm in trouble. And she's like, oh, I want to help you. Oh, I want to do all these things. And oh, I want to like rush over and just take care of you. Like, she should have been a little bit suspicious of him. I don't need a literal like, oh, I'm going to need 3 to 6 weeks and you're going to need to call your healthcare provider. Like, of course I don't need any of that. I just need a little bit of hesitation on her side. It didn't quite track that she was immediately like, I'm all in on you. And it's funny, when I first I watched this with my wife, and she fell asleep like 10 minutes in, and when the next day I was like, babe, you should watch Suitable Flesh. This is your kind of shit. This is your jam. She loves tawdry, cheesy, sleazy thrillers. Like, she loves that stuff. Showgirls is one of her favorite movies in the world, if you can understand what she's into. When she finally watched it, she went, I don't understand why Heather Graham's character is so into this guy. That's her in her world, in her genre. I'm talking to somebody who lives that stuff. And she was just like, I don't understand why she's so into this guy. Help me out here. If I missed something, is there something in the magic that does that to a character that I just completely glossed over when I watched it?
No, I don't think there's anything there that, like, the magic makes you drawn to them in any way. I think what I took, and again, certainly not, trying to explain away the movie, to be fair.
Sure.
And I'll agree that it was a really quick transition from I'm a doctor, I care about you, to like, let's get it on. I get it. But the vibe I took away from the film was...
But I wanted to be clear. It's not just that I want to get it on. It was even just like, I'm going to help you specifically. Even that to me seemed accelerated.
That I'll excuse a little bit, because again, I understand, like, because one thing they did that I liked about this movie is when they show Dr. Derby earlier, she's dealing with a guy who is trying to quit smoking. That's kind of like the mundane.
Yeah.
That's just like the mundane nature of it. And when you meet Asa and he says, I read your book, and she's like, which one? Which means she's a multi-time authored, doctor. She's written multiple books. I kind of took what I took away from it is that she's kind of falling into this doldrum, this pattern of kind of boredom in her life. She has her most exciting patient is a guy trying to quit smoking, and she goes home, and her husband, they show them having sex early in the movie, and it's just very missionary, formulaic, like
super dry.
Super, yeah, like there's no foreplay here. Like we're just gonna go, like this is like our Tuesday night regular. And so what I took away from that was kind of like the twofold of she was attracted to him because that's just natural. You're going to be attracted to a person whether you act on it or not. And then he had a really intriguing problem. He had a problem that she could solve. That was what she wrote about, the schizophrenic DID.
Right.
And so I think that's where I took away that she was immediately drawn to him for two reasons. One, because she found him attractive. And then two, because he had a problem that presented to her that she hasn't seen in a while, and it allowed her to escape the kind of doldrum of her life of just the daily grind of like, oh yeah, I'm trying to quit smoking.
Yeah.
I don't like my job. And I'm not saying those aren't serious issues. By the way, like I took psychology for many quarters in school. I was only a few quarters away from actually earning a psychology degree. I'm not belittling those issues.
Sure.
Be clear about that. I want to belittle people like how you need to go to psychiatry to help you with quitting smoking or other vices. Be clear about that. I'm not belittling that. But that's again, for her, she was dealing with these big, involved problems, and then it kind of got whittled down to, I need to quit smoking. And so I feel like that's kind of what I saw, like that first half hour, you can kind of see she's bored with her life. Like she's fallen into this, I'm 45, I'm successful, but now I'm just kind of like cashing a paycheck. And that's kind of what I took it as. And her husband's very much the same way. Like there's nothing really exciting about their marriage. He's just like, here's this delicious fish I cooked, and let's go upstairs to the phone because it's Tuesday night. And so I agree it all moved very fast. And I agree.
Yeah, because I think a lot of, sorry, I'll let you finish. I was just saying, like, a lot of that happened in literally the moment they met. Like, It was that fast, and that's what threw me.
I think the timing would have been better, is all I'm saying. Like, if they would have shown her in her home life and then transitioned into the Ace and stuff, I get it. But that's what I took away from it. This is just a very highly successful, highly respected author, doctor in her field. But, that's like, again, I'm not belittling general practice medicine, but if you are a life-saving doctor and you worked in, you were a neuroscientist and you were like the best brain surgeon ever and you saved lives and you changed the world. You changed the world with your brand of surgery. And then the Doctor Strange thing happens, you break your hand and now you're just a general practitioner and all you're dealing with are guys, people coming in being like, I got a sniffle or, I got a cough that won't go away. That's a huge change for that kind of profession, right? Like you're like, I was a life-saving leader in my field, and now I'm just, have you ever seen, this is going way off topic. Have you ever seen the show The Shield?
No, I know The Shield, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. I'm going to give you a slight spoiler here. I assume if you haven't seen it at this point, you're probably not rushing out to see it. So I'm going to give you a small spoiler here. The character in this movie is like a cop, and he's in the field, and he's a badass leading this task force, and like they're batting down doors and arresting drug dealers. Like very, macho, adrenaline rushed cop. By the end of the series, without giving away the entire series, he basically has that all taken away from him, and his job at the end of the show is he's basically sitting at a desk processing forms. And you could just see the misery on his face because even though he's still employed, he's still technically in law enforcement, his strings have been cut. He has no power, he has no team, he has no authority. He's just sitting at a desk processing files. And that's kind of how I took this role, is that she's this world-famous, world-renowned doctor, and it's all been taken away from her. Now she's just treating people who are trying to quit smoking. So again, the timeline could have been better. I agree. They could have done it a little bit later where she meets Ace and you understand it a little bit better. But once you get into the story, that's how I took it. That she's just bored with her life, and this guy was attractive, a younger, attractive man, and he presented her with a problem that was in her field that she could solve, and it wasn't a mundane, boring problem.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I do think that precedent that it set, where it was like she immediately dives into him and his problems. Like, I mean, immediately. I'm not exaggerating when I say, like, in the scene where they meet, she's already like so committed to him. That set a weird precedent in the rest of the movie that sort of felt like it was just tumbling towards its final conclusion, which, by the way, its final conclusion is great. I'm going to say that my favorite part of this movie indeed is where it culminates, like how it ends. How it gets there, it leaves something for me to be desired. That said, and this brings us back to Founders Day. If you loved and consumed a lot of Skinamax movies and Skinamax thrillers, and I even watched Dress to Kill, De Palma's Dress to Kill recently. If you love stuff like that, there's no reason why you wouldn't love this. Like, it falls in line with that genre of film. I just felt like in the script, things just happened way too fast, and it set a precedent that could never kind of be reined back in. But the ending, I'm going to end on a positive note with how I feel about Suitable Flesh. I love actually where the movie ends. My favorite part of the movie is that in the end, Ephraim is in Dr. Derby's body, and he's trying to get into Dr. Upton's body, Barbara Crampton's body, and they're having like this back and forth battle where he keeps switching bodies, and he's got a gun, but then he needs to switch to the other body because he's not holding the gun. It's that part I loved and I thought was so clever, and I was like, damn, dude, like it's not often that I call for a movie to be longer, but it's almost like, yeah, if this movie was 2 hours instead of 100 minutes, and we would have been able to kind of bring that let those characters boil and steam a little bit more, that ending would have had like so much more impact to me.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it for what it is. I'm a big De Palma fan, especially of his 80s films. You mentioned Dress to Kill. One of my favorites is Body Double, which I mentioned earlier. The guy from, Craig Wasson from Nightmare on Elm Street was in that movie. And that movie, again, not getting too deep into spoilers, it's basically about a guy who goes and apartment sits for a famous actor that he's friends with. He's a struggling actor, can't get roles, very much like, down on his luck. And his friend, who is like a super successful guy, has this high-rise apartment. He's going away, leaving town. He says, hey, can you like come apartment sit for me? I'll pay you some money, and you can hang out at my place for a week and just, chill in the lap of luxury. And he says, sure. And while he's there, he starts staring out the window at the next door neighbor, and she's an incredibly attractive woman who just happens to always undress in front of the window. And he immediately becomes full-on obsessed with her. And it kind of feels like why? Like, you're kind of like, is that really what happens? Like, I understand you're like a horny dude and, you don't have anything going on in your life, but like you get full on obsessed with this woman, and he basically starts following her, and like it gets full on like stalker, and like it's really creepy. But you're like, why? Like, this dude like has no reason to be this obsessed with this woman. Yes, right. She's attractive. Yes, she gets naked in front of a window, but that's not enough to make me think, man, I need to follow her. And like,
no, he would just stand in front of the window and grease his pole for 90 minutes. That's what the movie would be.
So that's kind of where Suitable Flesh falls in for me, where it's like, does it make total sense that Dr. Derby would just become obsessed with Asa? No, but it's getting to the better parts of the film when you talk about the body swapping, and then you deal with the Ephraim being in a man, and then Ephraim transferring his consciousness into a woman. He's like, oh, I like this body. This is a different feel. And they
that's a good point that you bring up. Okay, remember at one point, because you were like, I don't think there is a being. At one point, when he's in Heather Graham's body, he goes, I don't know, maybe at some point in my life I was a woman. So I think there is a being, now that you bring that up.
I don't know. I don't know.
Because the being was like, oh, I don't remember how I started. I remember like the being, when Heather Graham is infected by this thing, she says that. She says, I don't remember how I started. Maybe I did start as a woman. So there was a being.
I mean, maybe, or maybe it was the whole like, the born again, I was reanimated as resurrected as a, when you have past lives kind of thing. I have no
Maybe.
idea.
Yeah, it's a little muddy. Maybe. I'm not sure.
Either way, though, like that. So, like the transferring consciousness, once they get into the meat of the story, it goes on. Does it move fast? Sure, but can you kind of forgive it just because once it gets in the story and you really get into the bulk of what's happening here, it all starts moving really quickly and you're dealing with the body swap and you kind of learn the rules of it, which is by the time you do it the third time, you're there forever. And so once he transfers his consciousness into Elizabeth, you're like, uh-oh, she's got limited time here. If he reads this incantation 2 more times, you're pretty much screwed because he's going to take over your body. And so the concept is simple enough, and I don't need it to be more than what it is. There's a different version of this movie where they spend 20 minutes telling me about the mythology of the book.
Yeah, we don't need that.
Don't need that. So for what it is, for the simple concept of being an early 90s, late 80s, early 90s erotic horror thriller, it worked for me.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that this sounds like a criticism, but it's a compliment. I wanted more from this movie. I wanted 20 more minutes of like character development and character work. I'm not actually placing any blame on Joe Lynch or Dennis Paoli or anything like that, because probably budget meant there was not going to be 20 more minutes of this movie. You have a certain schedule you got to sit with. Heather Graham has certain availabilities, Barbara Crampton, etc. All these different actors. You got to make what you got to make, right? Maybe there is a longer, more drawn out version of this movie that couldn't have gotten made. That's what happens in the movie they put in front of us. Okay, didn't work for me, no problem. I still want people to see it, and I still really loved the ending. I loved what it culminated in.
All right, with that being said, let's get into categories. Let's kick things off as we do each and every week here on the show and talk about best performance. So, Patrick, when you talk about suitable flesh, who is your best performance?
Damon, my best performance goes to Heather Graham as Dr. Elizabeth Derby. Yeah, I got all the wavelengths of what she was up to. I know that she was a bored doctor who had a lot more potential than her current life was giving her. Her ordinary world was boring, and she was ready for something crazy. And in walks this young, handsome kid, and the horny kicks right off, Damon. And thank goodness, you know what I mean? It's funny and fun. And then of course she gets inhabited by the being or Ephraim or whoever it is, and things get crazy. And Heather Graham gets to show off a lot of range in this movie. So I just went to myself like, it's so cool seeing her again. I haven't seen her in a while. And it's cool seeing her try out all these different things. At one point, she's sort of sassy. At another point, she's completely manic and crazed because she wants this thing out of her. At one point, she's swapping bodies with Barbara Crampton / Ephraim / the being. She's got a lot to do in this. She's got a lot of heavy lifting to do in this movie, and I think she does a great job.
So normally I'll just warn you ahead of time. We got 2 categories where we're picking the same person, and I'm not going to change that just because I want to pick a different person. I thought the performances in this movie across the board were solid. Of course, I love the Queen, Barbara Crampton, but the star here and the best performance is Heather Graham because she has the most to work with. I mean, this is her starring vehicle, and it's hard to go against that in this kind of film. Everyone else around her is good, but she's able to really show off her range and kind of go from one thing to another. And when you're a performer like that, like to do it in the same movie, that's not easy because you do kind of live in the bones of a character and you kind of learn that character. This character switches constantly. And so she's, 1 minute she's herself, the next minute she's Ephraim. And then, you got the switch with Daniela, her friend Daniela Upton, and it switched again. So the fact that she can control these different mannerisms and kind of attach herself to all these different characters is super impressive. And yeah, I first saw Heather Graham in Boogie Nights, which is one of my all-time favorite films. And I've seen her in several things since then. She's still a very regular working actor, but much like you, I haven't seen a ton of what she's been in lately. And I thought, man, what a great, and again, maybe it's just because I watch a lot of horror and she doesn't do a lot of horror. But
I hope she does more.
She was really good in this film. And I was like, this is why I always liked Heather Graham. Like, this is proof why I always enjoyed Heather Graham.
Oh, that's totally, you couldn't have said it better. This is why I like Heather Graham, and I was so excited to see her in a movie.
Yeah. Now, we don't always bust out our next award, but sometimes we feel like we have to because there are just moments where things happen, and, sometimes it requires you to go a little over the top whether it's through performance, whether it's through your the delivery, whatever the case may be. We like to call this our Nicolas Cage One Testicle Award.
One testicle!
Listen to him go. Listen to Nick Cage just go in that moment. That is exactly the spirit of the One Testicle Award. And it came out for me, Damon, in this movie. I didn't know if you had a One Testicle Award, but I certainly had one. And that was anytime any actor in this movie was inhabited by the being, they gave it the one testicle. Like, for sure. So really, the One Testicle Award, Damon, goes to the cast who was infected. So you're talking about Judah, you're talking about Heather Graham, you're talking about Barbara Crampton, you're talking about oh gosh, why don't I have his name pulled up right in front of me? Bruce Davison, the great Bruce Davison. When any of these guys are inhabited by the being, they give it the one testicle, Damon.
They go full out, and it's funny you say that. So my one testicle, I actually thought about this before you even sent me categories. My one testicle was Bruce Davison because he has some reactions in this movie where he really goes for it, where he really goes full on like one testicle. He really belts out some hits, and his facial expressions, and it's just like you can really tell like he's just going for it in this role. And Bruce Davison, great character actor, been in a lot of things. But boy, did he give his Nicolas Cage best on this particular performance.
He did. Yeah, no, I'm glad. And that's why I was scrambling to find his name, because of all the One Testicle awardees on this stage, on this unprecedented day where we gave the award to everybody, Bruce Davison, he was like leading the charge. Like he was going for it, man. I was like, someone watch him. He's going to have a heart attack.
Yeah, he was full on he was full on Al Pacino in Heat when he's like, she's got a great ass, and you got your head all the way up it. Like that was full on Bruce Davison in this movie.
Great ass. No, totally, man. Total one testicle moment. Anytime our spirit was in the dark, on the dark side.
Yeah. Our next category is one of our newer ones where we talk about the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. And this actually goes back to another Stuart Gordon movie. We named this award after the iconic horror actor Ken Foray and the moment in From Beyond, which of course is a Stuart Gordon movie, also starring the Queen Barbara Crampton, that he runs down to a basement to save the day, but he just so happens to be wearing nothing but a thong bikini. And so we just thought, man, that dude is that guy saves the day. He is the MVP of that movie. So our Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP award goes to
Barbara Crampton. And I knew, Damon, I was like, if Barbara Crampton doesn't come up as your best performance, she's definitely your MVP. Well, she was my MVP too, because let's be honest, she kind of dips in and out of this movie. Like she's in a good part of the beginning, and she's got a great middle section. But man, does she shine in the end when she's got to go toe-to-toe with this being and her best friend, Heather Graham, all being inhabited and kind of moving across each other. There's a lot going on. And it's so fucking great to see a badass veteran like Barbara Crampton just like going toe-to-toe with top shelf actors that are maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 years younger than her. And she's just kicking as much ass as she possibly can. Yeah, come on, Damon. Was there ever going to be another MVP? It's got to be Barbara Crampton.
It is Barbara Crampton, but I'll go in a different route and kind of go back to what I said before, and I won't rehash everything I said before, but the reason I actually give Barbara Crampton the MVP here, not only because her performance is great.
Yes.
I didn't give her best performance only because this is a Heather Graham vehicle. This is made for Heather Graham to star in, and she really does a great job. So it's harder to just steal away the spotlight from her because it was her movie. That being said, Barbara Crampton gets my MVP award because of what I said earlier. She is championing this cause. Stuart Gordon sadly passed away in 2020. He was originally going to direct this. This was a vehicle, being reteamed with Dennis Paoli and Barbara Crampton. They were all teaming together again. Sadly, he passed away. The fact that she championed this cause to say, we're still going to do this movie. We're still going to make a Stuart Gordon movie with Joe Lynch, with Heather Graham, all these kind of things. And she brought it to that point. And originally she wasn't in the movie. She wasn't going to be in the movie. This was a last minute decision for her to step in and star as Dr. Daniela Upton. She wasn't originally going to be, she was going to be a producer. So the fact that Barbara Crampton, as a great actor in her own right, decides, hey, I'm going to take a back seat. I'm going to take a supporting role. And I'm going to champion the cause of continuing the legacy of Stuart Gordon. I love that. And so
Yeah.
that's why I give her the MVP because, again, not to restate what I said earlier, we need people like Barbara Crampton, but particularly this MVP award because of Stuart Gordon. He was such a prolific, iconic horror director. And the fact that Barbara Crampton said, sadly, he's gone, but his legacy lives on. And that's, to me, what Suitable Flesh is.
And she said as much in an interview regarding Suitable Flesh that she credits Stuart Gordon with starting her career, with giving her a career. So for her, she could do nothing less than to make sure and see that this movie got made.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about best sex scene because this is a very horny movie.
Yes.
And there's a lot of getting it on here. So Patrick, what was your favorite Skinamax scene in Suitable Flesh?
Damon, like we would be doing ourselves and our fans a disservice if we didn't put this category in, because we don't often do erotic thrillers here, Damon. We just don't. But there was one scene in particular where, the chaos of what is happening is going, and we already know that there's already been some sexual activities between Asa's character and Dr. Derby. And at one point, he comes to her office and gets her up against the windowsill. And listen, he makes sure that she's feeling good. If you know what, I don't want to get too graphic here, but I think you know what we're talking about here. So he's tending to her needs, but in the spirit of like the psycho cosmic horror of a good Stuart Gordon and Dennis Paoli movie. While she's at that window in the throes of ecstasy, she is like flung from the window and falls down. And why I really chose this scene wasn't necessarily for the sex part, which was fine. It was for that falling shot of her falling down the window, and she's kind of doing this, and her hair is blowing as she's falling towards the street. I loved that shot, and I just loved that, like, it was part of it. Now it was all part of her head games, of course. But head games are what we play when we're doing erotic thrillers, Damon. So that was my pick.
Yeah, that's a good one, and that's probably the best one, just because we so rarely see that particular act carried out in movies.
I love how we can say anything on here, but we're just dancing around sex scenes.
It's like watching the Seinfeld episode where they're talking about masturbation, and it's the master in my own domain. Like they never say the word at all, but you know what they're talking about. Same kind of like there's a Seinfeld episode where they talk about this where Elaine is dating a musician and she's like, he doesn't do everything. Would it be nice? I'm not saying it wouldn't be nice that they know what they're talking about. South of the equator is what they call it. That's very much what we're talking about here. So yeah, I appreciated that they went for it in this movie, which you don't see a lot. By the way, you say we don't do a lot of erotic thrillers. What are you talking about? Next week we're doing Basic Instinct. What are you talking about?
Oh, are we? Okay, good to know. I need to brush up on that.
We're going on an erotic thriller ride right now. I'm kidding. My best sex scene was a little later in the movie after Ephraim / The Being, because you may be right about The Being. I'm not 100% sure one way or the other, but you may be correct in that. Ephraim is in Dr. Elizabeth Derby's body, and she meets her husband, Jimmy Mattingly III from The Wonders, a.k.a. Jonathan Chase, who is her husband, which, by the way, he's like 54. Could dude have less abs? Jesus Christ.
Oh, my God. Guy's ripped.
He is like full on like bodybuilder ripped. I'm like, good Lord, did you stop playing in The Wonders and you went on steroids? Like, what's going on here? Dude is putting all of us to shame, by the way. He's like 54.
He that was another problem with the movie. I was like, how unrealistic. This guy is so handsome. Why would she bother with some kid? Like, this guy's really good looking.
Yeah, he's like ruggedly handsome and ripped to shit. I was like, man, Jesus Christ, man. He's like, you could wash clothes on his abs. Good God. But there's a scene where the being takes over Elizabeth's body and she finds there's a great line, which we didn't do best line for this one, but I almost pulled it anyways, where she realizes she's up in the mirror, she's looking at the mirror, she's like, I really like this body, and kind of exploring the female body, if you know what I'm talking about. And she looks in the mirror, and then her husband calls to her and she's like, oh, I'm married. It's like, oh no, I'm married. But she goes downstairs and basically seduces Jimmy Mattingly from The Wonders and puts him on the couch, and she whips out a butcher knife and starts waving it around, and it's full on, exactly what you would think it'd be. She's on top and doing some business and basically knife playing with him at the same time. And then what made this my favorite sex scene is after the being leaves Elizabeth's body later, when it's back to being Elizabeth again, her husband's like, he is way turned on by this. Like,
oh yeah, he liked that.
He's not the vanilla one, it turns out. He really likes the kinky stuff. And so he full on just takes off his shirt and he has like little cut marks and he's like, I loved it. Let's do it again. And she's like, what are you talking about?
You do what? We don't do nothing like that.
Yeah. So it's pretty, that scene just reminded me of that when he's just like, oh, I kind of dig this knife play stuff. And then later in the movie, he's like, cut me again. And she's like, what are you talking about? Exactly.
Yeah, no, those scenes were rather entertaining. The sex scenes were worth highlighting. We could have probably talked about them all, but those are two highlights in particular.
Let's talk about best gore, because there actually is some pretty good gore in this movie, Patrick. Yeah. I'll go first on this one. Again, a couple of good gore scenes, but the one that really got me was when Ephraim is trying to inhabit Ace's body. He finally does the final transfer, and the only way to kill a body, to actually end it, is to full on kill the brain. You have to go full on zombie. You have to kill the brain. And so Asa, as Ephraim, as the being, as his father, full on decapitates his dad, like cuts his head off. And it's a full on knife sawing across neck all the way through. And he literally holds up his dad's dead head. But man, the blood goes flying. It is a very, very graphic scene.
Right up there with the best of Stuart Gordon's type of gore and like viscerality. It's certainly there. And to that, Damon, my best gore is when the aftermath basically of Dr. Derby killing Asa because she wants to destroy his body, right? In turn, she runs over him, she smashes him, she stabs the fuck out of him. I mean, does all this intense stuff to him, but the aftermath on the autopsy table is as gruesome, and I think it would have made Stuart Gordon very proud, because it was as gruesome and as nasty as you've ever seen. Just whatever's left of his torso ripped to shreds, scratched, scraped, cut, bruised, blood, guts, gore. It's all there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when I rewatched it last night, because when you said in your let me read the note that Patrick sent me that. For his I'm sorry. That's kill. I'm gonna go kill.
That's for best kill. Yeah,
I gotta read. Yeah, so yeah, that was definitely great gore. Let me read the next one. Can I read what you wrote me for your best kill? So next category, best kill. I gotta read your note to me because it cracked me up. I read your note. You sent it to me. This is literally what Patrick wrote in his note for best kill. Liz kills the fuck out of Ace.
She does.
And I was crying laughing because, again, I saw this in December. I had a pretty good memory of what it was. When I rewatched it last night, I was like, she really does kill the fuck out of Asa.
Oh, my God. Yeah, she runs over him with, by the way, something that I'm going to have to pull out of a script that I'm currently working on. She uses her rear view camera to keep smashing him, and that's how we're seeing the killing. She's like backing up into him and smashing him again and again and again. I have it in one of my scripts, and now it's got to come out because a movie came out with it already in it. But yeah, she just relentlessly tries to kill him, and then when she gets out of the car, he's not quite dead, so she starts fucking killing him some more. Mind you, Dr. Elizabeth Derby, not an expert killer, so she doesn't kill him enough and in the right way, so that creates complication later down the road, which pays off with that great back and forth scene that we get later. But boy, does she try to kill the fuck out of Asa.
So I was originally going to go with later in the film when she finally does put Ace out of his misery and she shoots him with a gun. It's pretty graphic.
Yeah.
That was going to be my one. But then I rethought about it. And I was like, you know what? When you throw a dude out the window and then run him over with your car and back it into his body, pressed up against the building, and you just keep ramming it. And the coolest shot is the reverse camera. If you have a reverse camera in your car, you know what I'm talking about. The reverse camera, you see the image behind you. You just see that as her just like ramming Asa repeatedly. That is the best kill. And I can't beat it better than you saying Liz killing the shit out of Asa.
She did.
Pretty accurate. Kills the fuck out of Asa. That's absolutely accurate. Next category, let's talk about remake, sequel, or leave it alone. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is where we take the movie we're reviewing and we say, should they remake it? Should they give it a sequel, or should they leave it alone? So when it comes to Suitable Flesh, Patrick, Remake, sequel, or leave it alone?
Damon, I am firmly in the category of remake, but hear me out. Give this same cast, give it to Joe Lynch, just give him more money and more time. I think they were under a lot of constraint to make it happen under a very low budget. Let them make the maximalist version of this, because I think that version I'm very excited to see. I think some of my issues with this have a lot to do with the fact that you had to get what you had to get because they're on a low budget, and I understand what I've been there. I've worked on zero budget stuff, so I know what it means. So give them all the money they need to maximize their vision. I would like to see a remake.
I can understand that. And like I said, there's a couple details they could have changed if they had a bigger budget. I'd be okay with that. But I'm actually going to say sequel because I like the idea when you're dealing with a body swap horror, you can continue to run that out. Like you don't have to kill that idea. And when this film ends, we know that the entity slash Ephraim is now in Dr. Daniela Upton's body, and we know that Elizabeth Derby is still alive. She's just in a asylum. She's been packed away and put away, and so I think it would be cool if you do a sequel. And I've been killing it with these sequel titles lately, Patrick. I did Thanksgiving 2. I know what you did last Thanksgiving. Here's my title for this one: Suitable Flesh 2, Flesh for Fantasy. Go on full on Billy Idol title and do Flesh for Fantasy and just stay on the full on horny early 90s vibe. I don't know the storyline necessarily. You don't really need it. Just, you're continuing to transfer bodies. Maybe Dr. Derby's husband, Jimmy from the Wonders, maybe he gets suspicious. He can't work out anymore and his abs aren't as tight as they once were. He needs to find out what really happened to his wife. And so maybe that's the plot line. And so there's an investigation and then the thing has to start transferring bodies again. So that would be my, I think you could do a sequel and I think you could do a fun one.
You could, yeah. I mean, there's certainly a possibility there for sequels. You can make it happen.
Yeah. Real quick, let's talk one of our always favorite here, Patrick. Can we survive this horror film? Patrick, when it comes to Suitable Flesh, could you survive the horniness of this movie? Like, being honest, you're a man. Can you survive the horniness of Suitable Flesh?
No, Damon. When sex is involved, all guys are toast. That's just what happens. There's a great scene early on where she comes. She's not even possessed by him yet. She's just at home and they're having some kind of boring sex, but she's thinking about him, and so she reverses and gets on top of him and just fucking rides him like a fucking rodeo clown. Like I'd just be like, this is great. And then before I know it, my head would be decapitated on some cosmic altar somewhere.
Yeah, we're not surviving. Listen, I would love this. I'm not gonna put all men into one category because I'm sure there's men out there being like, "You're so stupid saying that." We're actually pretty simple creatures, Patrick. And when it comes down to it, when one thing is involved, we stop thinking with our brain and start thinking with another head. So no, we're not going to make it. Now, to be fair, Elizabeth Derby's husband does survive. He didn't get killed, so he's still out there. So I mean, I guess if you're lucky enough to survive that moment, you could make it. But in terms of am I going to resist? Am I going to make it through this in that regard? Absolutely not. I'm a dude. I'm not going to lie about it and say, "Oh no, I have the willpower of a Tibetan monk." No.
Nope. I would love to say I do, Damon. I don't. If sex involved, I'm dead. And this movie is sexy, so I'm screwed. Literally and figuratively, Damon, I'm screwed.
Yeah, both ways. I'm screwed and dead. Last category is always, is it scary? So Patrick, at the end of the day, Suitable Flesh. Is it scary?
No, Damon. It's not scary, and that's not a condemnation of the movie or anything like that. It's just, I don't think it's that kind of movie. It doesn't really even have jump scares. It's actually, I think it's very much a thriller, which is a whole subgenre of horror in and of itself. Thrillers do what? They thrill. It's in the title. This is very much a thriller. It very much titillates. It very much gets your motor running in more ways than one. It's got a lot of good gore and kills and sex and all that good stuff. So you get all those things that you're looking for in a thriller. They're there. So I really should have changed this to is it thriller? It is a thriller. Is it scary? No, I don't think it'll be keeping anybody up at night.
Yeah, it's not scary, but I don't think they intended to make it a scary movie. I mean, there's some gore, there's some gross scenes, and there's some kind of harrowing moments, but ultimately, as you said, it's a thriller, and thrillers aren't set up for that. If you go watch Body Double, or you go watch Dress to Kill, or you go watch, some of those movies like that, they're not really meant to scare you as much as thrill you. I mean, I know that sounds like a very generic term, but that's what it is. They're there to thrill you, and that's what Suitable Flesh does. And for me, it worked on that level. It was a thriller that thrilled me with some supernatural elements in there, of course, because you're swapping bodies. But for what it is, yeah, it's a thriller, and it worked as a thriller. That's all I needed it to be.
Yeah, simple as that.
All right, folks, that is our episode this week. We'll be back next week with more Rewind of the Living Dead. We're finally getting into a little bit more of the busy schedule coming up in February, so we'll actually have some new movies, newer, and again, not to say Suitable Flesh isn't new. It just dropped on Shudder, but it's actually been out for a couple months. We're going to get into some theatrical releases, I should say. Lisa Frankenstein's coming up, a couple other movies in February going into March, so we'll have plenty to review there. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course, over on my website, nerdcoremovement.com. You can also find us on YouTube. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. And if you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up anytime on email. That is rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. And you can always find us on social media at Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. You can find me at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a thank you, as always, for everyone tuning in. Stay horny, folks. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.